Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Up, Down, and All Around Exploring Spatial Relationships session today. We're excited to have you here joining us from all over California. A couple of things as we get started. If you could have a piece of paper and a pen handy, that would be great. Just have it at the ready. We'll be using it soon. And also, if you can type your name and where in California you are located right now. And then also, if you can describe your position, wherever you're sitting here tonight, relative to an item near you. So it's a little hard to see in the screen here, but I'm in Chicago. So I'm Lisa Ferguson and I'm with Erickson Institute. Myself and my colleague Donna Johnson, also from Erickson, both in Chicago, will be joining us in just a couple of moments. Great to see everybody signing in here. Also, again, like I said, if you can tell us, describe your position relative to an item near you. So for example, if you can see me and where I'm sitting, I am sitting in front of a bookshelf. Now you may be sitting something else might, near you, next to something, but go ahead and type in the chat where you're sitting relative to something around you. And while you're doing that, I'm just taking a quick look. Let's see. Mine is off, saying it's offline. So I don't know, Naomi, maybe you're reading the chats here. Some people are offline. I'm not sure what that means. A lot of people are saying mine as well. Same. But then here we have some people coming from Sonoma County, Cameo. I know you're all from somewhere in California, and I'm a little jealous because I'm in Chicago. Donna and I are both in Chicago. It's a little chilly. We're moving into the fall, but welcome to everybody. Okay, so again, as you're thinking about where you're sitting, if you can type a sentence telling us where you're sitting relative to an item around you. So here I'm getting a few responses. I have, let's see, Crystal. Whoops, I just lost Crystal. Okay, Crystal's saying I am in between the table and the portable dishwasher. And hopefully, I don't know if your dishwasher is full at the moment, but good for you. You're sitting right between the table and the dishwasher. Elizabeth says I'm sitting on my couch next to my side table. All right. Hopefully, you have a drink there to keep your thirst quenched while we're talking. Connie, I'm sitting beside a pillow. Christina's, I'm actually in Montana. Oh, welcome, somebody from Montana. And I'm sitting on a chair. I love this. Christine is saying I'm from Fresco and I'm sitting up to a kitchen table. Interesting. Now, Donna, you've just joined us. Can you tell us something about where you're sitting relative to an item around you?
I am sitting next to my window.
All Well, we're going to hold these thoughts because this is exactly how we want to be thinking today as we are getting ready to share with you a little bit about spatial relationships. So, Donna, do you want to move to the next slide? And we can just share a little bit about ourselves, just briefly. Donna and I are both from Chicago, from the Erickson Institute. We are a graduate school in downtown Chicago that specializes in early childhood education and development, birth through 8 years old. And we are both a part of the Early Math Collaborative. So, welcome to our session today. All right. So as we keep moving along, we just want to give you our 3 goals that we have for today that we want to make sure we're covering as we're talking this evening. So first, we want to make sure we're discovering the importance of language and gesture in the development of spatial reasoning in the early childhood classroom. Second of all, we're going to be learning how to describe relationships, just like we just did a little bit of here, between objects and places with mathematical precision. And then thirdly, we're going to leave with ideas to engage your students in spatial thinking in fun and meaningful ways. So these are the goals that we have by the time we're finished today. So we are going to get started with a fun picture here. So take a few moments, look at this picture just silently for a moment and think to yourself, what do you notice? I know there's a lot to look at here. And what I'm talking about is just the picture, not the little person there on the bottom. Just the picture. What do you notice? And as you're looking at that, think about how you would describe what you're noticing using spatial language, much like we just did earlier. So, Donna, I'm going to ask you, can we give them an example? Do you want to give us an example of what it might look like to use some spatial language describing what you're noticing.
Sure. I see two eggs and a beater inside what looks like a silver aluminum bowl.
Okay. And for an example, as we're sharing, you go ahead and type in the chat a sentence describing what you notice using spatial language, just like Donna and I are sharing. I'm looking at this picture and I'm noticing let's see, a stick of butter in between the egg carton and the metal bowl. I'm going to throw it back to you, Donna.
Let's see. I see two salt shakers next to a bowl that has some cracked eggshells.
Okay, so I heard you say next to. We talked about in, and I think we said in between. I'm noticing there is a yellow napkin under a plate. And I see, let's see, Ivana is saying, I see a plate between a napkin and a fork.
I
Oh,
like
it's kind of
that
like
one. I
a
like
sandwich.
that one.
Very creative. Yeah. And I see a fork on a plate. Okay.
Oh,
Martha's saying the eggs inside a bowl are inside of the bowl and a fork is on top of the plate. And then she even counted the eggs. There are 11 eggs inside of the carton.
oh, I like Christina. She says, I see a fork on a plate, on top of a napkin, on top of a placemat, on top of a table.
This is starting to sound familiar. I think I've heard a story kind of like that. All right. So thank you so much for joining us. And there's another one. I see one egg white next to a dark brown egg and one light brown egg. Okay, so there are a lot of things looking at this picture we could say, right? When we're thinking about the position of these items and where they are relative to the objects around them.
Mm.
So we're going to continue this again, thinking with along these lines as we get ready to um, see an experience or have an experience where we're going to get to hear a story and try some of this in a visual kind of way. So I'm going to pass it over to Donna.
So I don't know how many of you all have heard of the book Rosie's Walk by Pat Hutchins. It's a wonderful children's story, and we are going to engage in Rosie's Walk. So now you need to make sure you've got a piece of paper and a pen. We're going to be using that. So I am going to read Rosie's Walk, and as I read it, I want you to draw Rosie's movements. Okay? Here we go. Rosie the hen went for a walk across the yard, around the pond, over the haystack, past the mill, through the fence, under the beehives, and got back in time for dinner. Now I'm going to read it again so you can check your drawing and fill in any missing spots. Rosie's Walk. Rosie the hen went for a walk across the yard, around the pond, over the haystack, past the mill, through the fence, under the beehives, and got back in time for dinner. So, this is the time when I wish we were in person so we could see everyone's drawings. We could compare them. We could talk about how they were, how people drew and what they captured on Rosie's Walk. But what we can do is look at a couple of samples. And these are some drawings that were from others who've heard Rosie's Walk. And Lisa, I'm wondering, what's one thing you notice as you look at these two drawings?
Well, I would say the paper that I'm going to say is on the left side, the
Mhm.
lined paper. I noticed that drawing is starting out on the left, and it goes kind of down to the bottom, then over to the right, and then it goes back up to the top again. And I guess they kind of were holding that paper more in a up and down vertical way. And then the picture on the right looks like it's more horizontal. And the person started out on the left again, which tells us something. We're used to starting on the left for things, right? Reading is like that. And then they went to the right, and then they went down and around. So very different directions when they started Rosie's walk.
And that makes sense. I mean, you may have there may be people who've started in various positions. Some may have started at the top and kind of worked their way down, like the one on the left. Some may have started at the top and worked their way across. But some of you may have started at the bottom. We didn't give any instructions in terms of where Rosie's position started with respect to the paper. So that was one variation. Another interesting piece was in the picture on the left. If you notice, they're down there eating. And then it was like when I read it the second time and it said that Rosie got back in time for dinner, they realized, oh, Rosie wasn't having dinner down there. Rosie had to get back to the starting point. And so we see that line that goes back, even though she's down there eating at the bottom of the page. And we often see if you don't know the story and you're receiving the information sequentially, you don't know what's going to happen next or when it's going to end. When you get to that last step, you'll see that longer line that kind of gets you back to where Rosie started. But you know something that's really interesting, Lisa?
What's
Um, no, in neither of these pictures did Rosie retrace her steps. And I'm wondering, did anybody, when we said Rosie got back in time for dinner, did you go back the same way Rosie traveled to get to that point? Or did you kind of complete a loop?
Mm-hmm. And maybe we're kind of connecting that to our own experiences a little bit, right? With how we think about moving through space. And when we get somewhere, do we go back the way we came, or do we just keep going? Depends where we're located and how close and or far away we are from our destination.
Exactly. So in all of these situations, though, we see we were describing Rosie move with respect to the objects and places around her.
Mhm.
So that gets us to our first big idea that relationships between objects and places can be described with mathematical precision. So, just like we did with the photo when we were describing where the eggs and the plate and the spatulas and the pans were located with respect to one another. And with Rosie, we were describing how Rosie was moving through space with respect to the objects around her. We want children to be able to do that same thing.
Mhm. Okay. So there's a question maybe we're thinking is, how do these big ideas about spatial reasoning develop in children? So I'm glad you asked. We're going to take a look at a video right now where we're going to see a child being interviewed by an interviewer. So it's not the child's teacher. And just as we're listening, it's going to be important to note that the child's second language is English and the interviewer's first language is English. As we watch this video, pay attention to the position words you're hearing that are spoken, and then you can go ahead and type them in the chat as we go along, as you hear them, and we'll see all the different words we collect. Okay, those position words. I think we can go ahead and get it started.
All right.
The doggy went inside in the sandbox to see if was his teddy bear there? No. He went around the wagon to see around the wagon. Can you make him go around the wagon? Around the wagon. He went, not yet, he went near the mailbox. Can you make him go near the mailbox? Was he there? Not inside. No. He's not in the mailbox. Then he went up the tree and he went behind. Where was the teddy bear? He was behind behind the tree and he went back into his bed. So you tell me where I take my doggie.
And the puppy go around the mailbox.
Around the mailbox.
And see the teddy bear in the mailbox.
And in the mailbox, he's not there. So what does he do now?
Then he go around in the wagon.
He goes around the wagon.
And she go up in the sandbox.
He goes where in the sandbox?
In the
He goes in the sandbox. No teddy bear.
And she go around in the tree and see in the teddy bear. And
She goes, can you show me around in the tree?
oh no.
Around. No teddy bear. So what is?
And she climbs in the tree and
She climbs in the tree and he's not behind.
And she up and see the tree.
And where is the teddy bear?
In the wagon.
In the wagon.
And she go in bed and sleep in tight.
Okay, I saw some people typing in the position words they heard. Go ahead and type those in as we begin to chat about this. I did forget to mention this is not, I think I mentioned this is not a teacher, but this was a video that Erickson at Erickson Institute did in order to get to the children's thinking. So it's really to understand the development. It wouldn't be an activity that we did with the children or the child. Okay, so I just want to make sure that's clear. We're trying to get at the heart of children's understanding and how they're developing this idea of spatial language. All right, so just looking at the list of words, I'm looking at the fact that the child had some position words, right? And some of course, the interviewer also was using position words. We heard a lot of inside. I'm looking at your lists here. In, around, there's a lot of around, near, up, behind. And yes, interesting. Angie, you mentioned that she has a lot of receptive language. And that expressive language develops later, right? And we could definitely see that she could understand and follow the directions that the interviewer was giving her more than she could use the words to describe them, right? So the first thing we would say is the child did have position words. She was confused about around the wagon, but the adult kind of helped her with showing how to move around the tree. And the adult was repeating around and asked her to show around. Can you show me around? And that gave her time to figure it out. And then she got it. She could follow those directions, like we said, the receptive language. But there was a little bit of a mismatch. It was easier for her to follow directions, right, than to give directions and use that productive, expressive language. It's a little more complex. And we could also see that, understanding this idea of spatial language isn't so simple, right? It's not so easy. It's a very complex process. And she was relying a lot on the gestures and the language of the adult there who was guiding her, right? So the adult's gestures were so helpful, and the child was also using gesture to explain to the adult what to do. She said, I think she said up in the sandbox. And then when the interviewer asked her to further explain, then she just said in, and she pointed in. She used a gesture herself to help communicate, because it's difficult sometimes to find the words. And we're going to find that as we talk and use spatial language ourselves, gesture can really come in handy and be really, really helpful. All right, so thank you for keeping track of all these good positional words that we were using. And that's one of the big ideas. Relationships between objects and places can be described with our words with mathematical precision. All right, and so we can use these descriptions to talk about these positions. So when you think about, well, that's not an activity you would, go and do in the classroom tomorrow with your children, because again, this was more of an interview to get to the understanding. There are some things you can try back when you go into the classroom, such as using precise language to describe spatial relationships. As you're talking with the children, it's easy sometimes to say, it's over there, or, it's over there on the other side or whatever, but we want to be really specific with our language. So instead of using words like over there, we might want to say next to the fish tank, on top of the bookshelf, above the pencils, behind the chair, being really specific in what we're saying and mindful of the position of things we're talking about to help build that language. The second thing we can do in our classrooms is use and encourage gesture, and not only with the children, but ourselves as well, so that both ourselves and the children are realizing the importance of gesture, movements, and other forms of representation to describe their those spatial relationships. And so, if you think about the fact that movement in space is basic but powerful in helping us develop our own spatial awareness, our sense of spatial awareness, we can ask students, when they're getting ready to make a transition from our group, maybe to go to the table, you can say, well, how are you going to get to the table from our circle today? How are you going to walk over to the sink to wash your hands today? And get the children to use their words, their gestures to explain their bodies as they're moving through space, so they can get to those the spatial language. And then a third idea would be to ask children to talk about, plan, and organize movements throughout space. So, one of the things you can actually do yourself too, going back to that second idea, is you can narrate your own movements as you're walking through the classroom. Oh, going to get my coat so we can go outside, but I'm going to have to walk past the table and I'm going to go around the garbage can, and there's my coat. And you can also do that with children, right? You can describe their movements. So, let's watch Donna as she's going to walk over to get in line. Let's see where she's walking. Oh, she's walking next to the sink. She just went between the chairs, and she's standing next to the door now. So you can be very specific in using these words with children as well. And of course, you don't have to do this every single time, right? But just being mindful of how you might bring spatial language into the classroom, and then trying these ideas and finding other ways to bring it into the classroom as well. So speaking of classrooms, I am going to pass it to Donna to take us into a classroom now, where we're going to see an actual classroom activity that you might want to try with your students.
And before we go into the classroom and look at that video, Lisa, something you said just again struck me. When we narrate, our movement through the classroom and narrate how children are moving, they will begin to narrate their own movement and the movement of their classmates. As we raise their awareness of that spatial language and give them these experiences, they will start to use that spatial language as well. So we're going to see a classroom activity where they're exploring movement through space. This classroom, the English is the second language for all of the children in the classroom. And again, in this classroom, the teacher's first language is English.
Okay, let me get it to toggle up here.
Yesterday we read the story Rosie's Walk. And we talked about many ways Rosie traveled. Can you think of some ways Rosie traveled? Yihang, how did Rosie travel?
She went across the river and the fox went over it, but she fell in.
Oh, you have some good position.
I want to pause 1 second, because as you all are listening to the video, I want you to pay attention to two things. One, we want to pay attention to how is the teacher helping to bring out the math, these ideas about spatial relationships, and also what evidence do we see of children's understanding about spatial relationships. All right.
She went across and she went over.
My children need lots of practice with position words. Sometimes they understand what the word means, but they can't associate what they're doing with the word. So this project with the obstacle course was a great one for them, because they were able to move their bodies along with saying the words. The constant repetition of those words as the children were chanting them helped them associate the word with the action.
Well, look at our rug today. We've made an obstacle course. But you need to help me think of how we're going to travel through it. Do you think you can help me? We're going to really travel. But can you help me think of ways?
Yeah, pretending.
We have a table.
So we have to
How
walk.
can What could we do with it? Under, is that, wait, Yeehan, don't do it yet. Is that a good idea? Under? Do you all know what under means?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, go ahead, show us, Yeehan.
Go down.
Yeehan's going to show us under.
Yes.
Good job. Come on back, Yeehan. Oh, you can just walk around the table to come back. Can you go around it? Okay. I have 2 chairs over there. This one I want to show you because Rosie didn't do this in her walk. On the chairs, you're going to go between the chairs. Can you say that? Between the chairs. Look at Mr. Turtle. We're going to go past Mr. Turtle. You can wave to him when you go past. Oh, and we have a small table. What do you think we can do with this? Go over. Is that a good idea? I would like you to step 1 foot over and then the other. And I have a tube here. I wonder what we can do with this tube. We went under the table, between the chairs, past the turtle, over the little table. What do you want to do with this?
Pretend it's a rake.
Pretend it's what?
A rake.
Pretend it's a rake? And what would you do if it was a rake? What did the fox do with the rake?
He stepped on it in a boat.
Oh, he stepped on the rake. We could step on this. Okay, shall we try that? So remember, we're going to go under the table, between the chairs. Can you say it with me? Past the turtle, over the stool, and on the tube.
I felt that it was important for the children to chant the words as each child was doing the obstacle course.
Under the table.
It gave them more familiarity with the word. They were able to see what the child was doing while they were using the word, and also while they were doing the obstacle course, I was hoping they were chanting the words too so they could feel it while they were doing it.
Okay, let's say the words with Eric. Eric's going under the table. Good, Eric. Between the chairs, past the turtle, over the stool, and on the rake.
When we were done with the obstacle course,
Sorry.
I had the children focus on making a map of the obstacle
I'm
course.
sorry.
I wanted them to put the spatial relationships that they saw on.
There we go. I'm sorry.
All right, Lisa.
We are going to get back to our screen here, and there we go.
So we're waiting for you all to type in some things that you heard in terms of the teacher. Give you a few minutes, a few seconds just to do that. And one of the things that I noticed was that the teacher was very intentional in terms of gesture, in terms of her language. If you think about the obstacle course and what she did, she set the elements out, but she allowed the children to think about how they would move through the space. So that's important because, and she kept asking, is that a good idea? You know, so with the table, they said under the table, not over the table, because it was a tall table. But then when they got to the smaller table, under would not be a good way to move through that table, but over the table would be a good way. So by asking the children, how could they make use of the elements? It's a good way to see what do they understand about some of those position words. She was very intentional also in terms of using some of the language that was in Rosie's walk. So they had spent so much time reading the book and getting familiar with it. And then there was that opportunity for them to put it into practice as they were moving through the obstacle course. She allowed creativity and thoughtfulness. And Laura, great use of language and action. When children get those movements in their bodies, it's a way to anchor an understanding of what that word is. So under is something that they're familiar with, but words like between, that's a more complex concept. Past is not a word that we often use. So when we expand our vocabulary, when we connect it with not just using the spatial language and indicating how we're moving through space, it helps children to have a broader depth of understanding of spatial language.
Mhm.
Like you said, included the children. Something else that was really important, and Martha noticed that the repeating and the chanting of the words over and over. Again, getting that the movement and the language in their bodies. When and a language is not your first language, it's very important in terms of anchoring to connect the body movement and the language. And so I'm just thinking, if you're in a foreign country, you're hearing another language, it's the repetition that over and over that is so important.
Along with those gestures.
Mhm. So again, this is a very fun and engaging activity. She modeled as the different spatial language, and the teacher asked questions to really get a sense of what the children understood. And we saw what they understood because they were able to move through the spaces according to the instructions, and they were able to come up with ideas about how they should move through the space.
And the fact that they were very familiar, Donna, with this book, they'd already read it, gave it a nice context so the children could really begin to make a connection between the two.
Yes. Yes. So if we move on, we saw the children with the position words. They were using some gestures and they were moving accordingly. So what might an obstacle course look like in your classrooms? We want to think about what are some things you need to consider as you think about that question.
Okay, and so if we're thinking about this, kind of thinking about what we just saw, we want to start with, in this case, Rosie's Walk is a great book. There are other books out there as well, but Rosie's Walk is just wonderful to do an obstacle course, and you can read it several times with the children before you actually do the activity, so they can really focus first on the story and then get familiar with those position words next. And then, of course, like the teacher did, you want to invite children to be the ones to create the obstacle course using the classroom furniture, right? And so you need maybe just about 5 elements is all you need to have them focus on. But walking them through, having a conversation where they're the ones selecting what they're walking around or near, what the objects are going to be, and then how they're going to be related to them as they're moving in space near those items. And then children will be watching you as you model, as the teacher, model going through the obstacle course yourself as the children are telling you how they'd like for you to move through it at the same time while you're saying the position words. And then they can repeat those words as you're doing the motions one by one to really understand the concept here of what you're referring to. And then giving children a chance to go through the obstacle course as well while everybody says the spatial words together as they're moving in space is really fun. And if we were in person, we would have done this with you all as well. When we've done this live, teachers really have fun with this too, because they find out there's different ways to walk. You can walk slowly between chairs, you can skip between chairs. But the idea is that children one at a time will go through the obstacle course while everybody is watching and chanting those words with the child. And that can really be a fun way to get the idea into the children's bodies and also into their minds as they're moving. So these are the 3 big ideas that we have covered with you today. As you can, or the one big idea, I'm sorry, we have typically 3 big ideas. We only had time for one today, and that is describing space. Relationships between objects and places can be described with mathematical precision, and the words that we use will have a lot to say about that. So we want to think precisely about our language. All right. And so the goals for our session today were to discover the importance of language and gesture in the development of spatial reasoning in the early childhood classroom. Secondly, it was learn how to describe relationships between objects and places with mathematical precision. And then leave hopefully today with at least one idea to engage your students in thinking in fun and meaningful ways. Although we shared a few, right? We talked about implications in the classroom, modeling, narrating children's movements, asking them to narrate or plan their movements as they're walking through the classroom, as well as Rosie's Walk, this obstacle course for Rosie's Walk. So I don't know if anybody has any questions that you'd like to ask. We have just a couple of minutes. Anything we can answer as we wrap up in terms of the activity for Rosie's Walk. Go ahead and feel free to put them in the chat.
And while we're giving people a chance to think about questions, when you were talking about language, I was just thinking about the intonation is so important because I'm thinking about when they were talking about around the sandbox, or around the table, that those
drag it out.
movements take some time. You drag it out because it gives you a sense of that this movement takes time, as opposed to over something, and how your voice kind of goes up when we say over, or down a little bit when we say under. So really helping children to connect the movements with our gestures, with our words, with the tone of voice that we use. All of those things are so important. And one thing, I'm just thinking about our website, Lisa. We only had one time, we're only able to go through one big idea.
Yes.
But our website has a wealth of information. So early math at erickson.edu is a great place to look. We've got all the content areas, but in spatial relationships, we've got some wonderful video and articles and ideas and book suggestions for exploring spatial language. And one other great thing is that we have a sister website that is entirely in Spanish.
And, as I knew you were going to mention that, Donna, and it just made me realize, something really fun to do if you have children in your classroom who speak a language other than English, and they may enjoy, helping the rest of the class learn some spatial words in their language. That can be really fun, right? To have the child say the word while they're demonstrating that action, and then have the rest of the class say it, repeat it, and then as the child goes through it again, saying it with the child as they're following that obstacle course can really be fun, and it really can build self-esteem for that person whose language may not be, the first language may not be English. So that's another fun thing to try, and you'll all learn some new language as well. It looks like, just looking at some of the comments, teachers mentioned that they really appreciated the teacher's voice was very calm and inviting, right? It made you, as a child, it makes you want to share an idea and have an idea. You're not afraid to speak up about an idea for your obstacle course. Some people are mentioning maybe trying obstacle courses with small toys. There's that's there's value in that, of course, right? But there really is something about physically moving our bodies, and even maybe doing it outside can be kind of fun too, very different than inside. You might have like a hula hoop, there may be some, a slide to go down. I mean, there's such a variety of ways you can do this outside as well. The other big ideas. Well, Melissa, we wish we had time to talk more about them, but like Donna said, if you go to our website, you will find that we usually have 3 big ideas for every math content area. One is about perspective, talking about moving through space. Our perspective really plays a role in that. What we're seeing from where we're standing might be very different from what somebody else is seeing from where they're standing. So that's one of them. So thank you for.
We are at time, Lisa.
What's that?
We are at time.
I see that. I'm glad that you're going to try this. We hope you have a wonderful time getting to use trying the obstacle course with Rosie's Walk. So feel free to contact us. Our emails are right there on the website. Oh, and Elizabeth, she says, I only speak Spanish to my daughter. Oh, that's wonderful. And run a Spanish daycare. So the sister said, oh,
Thank
good.
you.
We're so glad to hear that. We have worked really hard to make sure we had the website up in Spanish. So I hope you find the information helpful and easy to use. And buena suerte. I also speak Spanish. So it's kind of nice to be able to use my Spanish as well. So I wish.
So Naomi said we have a few more minutes if we want to take a few more questions. So what I am going to do is I'm going to just really quickly, because somebody had asked about the big ideas, and you talked about the one about
The
perspective, Lisa. So what I did was I went to our book, Big Ideas in Early Math, What Teachers of Young Children Need to Know.
Uh-huh.
And the other two are spatial relationships can be visually and mentally manipulated. And then that idea about perspective, that our own experiences of space and two-dimensional representations depend on our point of view. So if we could think about that egg picture that we were looking at, depending on where you're positioned yourself, you might say that the plate, that the butter was in front of the salt shakers, or if you're on the other side of the table, you might say that the salt shakers were behind the butter. So it all depends on how we're positioned, and children are very self-focused.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're going to see everything from their own perspective. So when they realize there's another perspective, that they can see something just by repositioning themselves. And there's a great book called Ursa and the Little Digger. It's a great book on spatial relationships that brings in this whole idea of perspective and positioning. So again, wonderful children's literature to bring up the idea of spatial relationships.
And we showed this picture at the very beginning, and you can take some interesting photos and just ask children to notice what they see in terms of where things are located, just like we did with you, to give them a chance to use some spatial language and hear what other people are noticing as well.
So thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your taking your time, your evening, and learning with us. So have a great day.
Take care, everybody. And look us up if you come to Chicago, Erickson Institute. Bye-bye. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.